Hello, and welcome to the podcast of the presentation The Popol Vuh, a Mayan Mythistory. I am Dr. Marco Cabrera Geseric, and as an instructor of Latin American history at High Point University, I decided to visit Northern Arizona University and give this presentation on Wednesday, October 17, 2018. Please check the PowerPoint presentation that is going to be uploaded as well so you can follow up this conversation. So, if you go to slide number 3, you're going to see that actually this book, the Popol Vuh, is divided in 4 parts. The Popol Vuh is considered sometimes the Mayan Bible. But of course, that's really problematic, especially for those of you that actually may have a deeper knowledge of Christianity in general. You may understand that the Bible actually has a series of of ideas and intentions that may not reflect exactly in the Mayan Popol Vuh. The Popol Vuh is actually a short version of an older book, and actually includes some stories of creation. It includes actually the first people to be created and also the genealogy of these people, which actually may be represented in the first 5 books of the Bible or the Pentateuch and the Torah, if you want. So, the Popol Vuh, divided in 4 parts, actually presents some problems because, of course, what is happening is that this is a version of the Mayan creation story that actually is not being taken directly from an original book, but actually from the memory of somebody that actually saw that book. The Popol Vuh, the part 1, actually starts with these words, and that will give you a little bit of a clue of what is going on here with this story. This is the beginning of the ancient world. Here, in this place called Quiché, here we shall inscribe, we shall implant the ancient word, the potential and source for everything done in the citadel of Quiché, in the nation of Quiché people. We shall write about this now amid the preaching of God and Christendom now, because there is no longer a place to see it, a council book. There is the original book and ancient writing, but the one who reads and assesses it has a hidden identity. So the Popol Vuh actually has this very interesting introduction, very different from most sacred books, in the sense that this is some kind of a warning. If you follow what I just read, basically what the author is saying is that actually, first of all, this is the time of Christendom, and when he is saying in Christendom now, he of course remembers, therefore, that there was a before Christendom. That means that this book, the Popol Vuh, the one we have, actually was written in the 1500s, possibly 1540s, 1550s, about 20 or something years after the conquest of Guatemala by the Spaniards. And he talks about the council book, but he says that he is not longer capable to see it, that the book is not around anymore, because both the book with the ancient writing actually are hidden, including the person that owns the book. This is important because that means that the author, the person who is writing this, is very familiar with the book, but is not an expert. He possibly was a very good friend of the priest of that city that actually had the book. There's a chance there were, of course, more than one book, but he may actually therefore be actually connected to the person that to the scribes that copied this book, or to the librarian that kept this book. In any case, this is important because the story of the Popol Vuh, as we have it now, in my opinion, feels a little bit strange in the sense that there are some gaps in some of the stories that are not explained clearly. Now, not that most sacred books don't have gaps and that they lack some kind of logic. Sometimes we can see that in the Bible and other books, that they jump from one story to the other, and that actually sometimes they don't explain something very clearly. And of course, It makes us doubt about what is the story, the point of the story. In the case of the Popol Vuh, I feel not only these gaps, but I also feel that the author actually focuses a lot on certain stories, while others he just skims, he just goes through them very, very fast. So what I tried to do was to actually summarize the main ideas of the Popol Vuh into something that makes sense for us, and of course something that you can actually use and understand. So part one, of course, is the creation. It's the story of creation, and as most stories, it starts with the nothing. So from now on, I'm going to start to read passages of the Popol Vuh. And what I want you to do is to keep going on with the slides. I'm going to try to keep up with the name of the slide so you can keep up with the stories as well. Slide 4. This is the account. Here it is. Now it still ripples. Now it still murmurs, ripples. It still sighs, still hums, and it is empty under the sky. There is not yet one person, one animal, bird, fish, crab, tree, rock, hollow, canyon, meadow, forest. Only the sky alone is there. The face of the earth is not clear. Slide 5. Only the sea alone is pulled under all the sky. Whatever there is that might be is simply not there. Only the pooled water, only the calm sea, only it alone is pooled. Whatever might be is simply not there, only murmurs, ripples in the dark, in the night. Slide 6. Only the maker, modeler alone, sovereign plumed serpent, the bearers are in the water, a glittering light. They are there, they are enclosed in quetzal feathers in blue-green, thus the name plumed serpent. And of course, there is the sky, and there's also the heart of sky, Ukushkach. This is the name of the god as it is spoken. And then came his word. He came here to the sovereign plumed serpent, here in the blackness in the early dawn. He spoke with the sovereign plumed serpent, and they talked, then they thought, then they worried. They agreed with each other. They joined their words, their thoughts. They reached accord in the light, and then humanity was clear. When they conceived the growth, the generation of trees, of bushes, and the growth of life, of humankind in the blackness in the early dawn, all because of the heart of the sky, slide 7, named hurricane, thunderbolt, hurricane. How should the sowing be in the dawning? Who is to be the provider, nurturer? Let it be this way, think about it. This water should be removed. But there will be no high days and not bright praise from our work, our design, until the rise of the human work, the human design, they said. And then the earth arose because of them. Slide 8. Then the mountains were separated from the water, and the plumed serpent was pleased with this. So let's stop a second over here. This part of creation reminds us other stories of creation in the sense that you can see how there was nothing, then suddenly we have some basic elements, air, water, etc. And the gods, of course, are the ones going to be involved. And finally, in a kind of a big bang, if you want, with numbers, slide number 7, we see that actually there is a thunderbolt that actually starts the process of life. And finally, the earth is separated from the mountains. But in the whole process of creation actually has a very clear purpose, which actually is not that clear in some other traditions I have encountered. According to the Mayan people, the gods, because they actually meet, there's not only one god that decides this just because, but actually the gods decide. And before deciding, they have to meet, they have to argue, or they have to think and to worry, as the Popol Vuh say. So we have a council of gods. So this is very interesting. It's a communal work. It's not a work of a lonely god. So, but of course we know that among the Mayan people, they had the understanding of a large abstract divinity. So what happens is that most of the gods, as we like to call them, that exist are just different representations of that one single, very abstract God. That kind of a first energy. So when we talk about the plumed serpent, when we talk about the heart of sky, these are just different versions or different representations, different pieces of the larger God. But in any case, these are divine figures, and they actually decide to sit down and talk. And then here the Popol Vuh describes very clearly why they want to create the universe. It is because they want to create a nurturer, a provider. That's what humans are. This also actually gives us a very interesting a concept of the gods. The gods are very different from other traditions in the sense that actually they need the humans, or at least they admit they need the humans. Why so? Because the gods need to be provided with some kind of a food. They need to live. And of course, this is an abstract food. It doesn't mean proteins and vitamins as we need. But they need somebody to produce that. And the only one that can produce that are humans. So we can see gods that are depending on their creation. And that's why they need to create humans. The fascinating thing here is that they're already telling us that actually they are depending on the humans, and therefore that in this religious belief, humans actually have a power of bargaining with the gods because the gods owe them something. Of course, humans also owe something to the gods, but interesting is that actually humans can bargain with the gods, can negotiate, which you don't see in other traditions. So they try to create humanity. They try to create these providers, these nurturers. So let's go to slide 9. Now they plan the animals of the mountains, all the guardians of the forests, creatures of the mountains, the deer, birds, pumas, jaguars, serpents, rattlesnakes, guardians of the bushes. And then the deer and birds were told by the maker, modeler, bearer, talk, speak out. Don't moan, don't cry out. Please talk each to each. Now, name our names. Praise us. We are your mother, we are your father. Speak. Pray to us, keep our days. But of course, these are animals, so we can see there's going to be a problem, right? So the Popol Vuh says, but it didn't turn out that they spoke like people. They just quacked. They just chattered. They just howled. It hasn't turned out that our names have been named. Since we are the mason and sculptor, this will not do. So we can see that actually the gods really needs not only some creatures that can wander over the earth, but actually they need creatures that are capable to name them, to talk. And since the animals were not capable of doing that, therefore the animals didn't do it for them. They needed somebody that could actually pray to the gods. That's the kind of food, the energy that actually they need to survive. So what they do with the animals? Well, of course, what happens is that a lot of the myths in different religions are actually created by people that are trying to explain certain things that they seem kind of not logical or that they don't have an explanation for. So of course the Mayan people saw in nature that, well, actually nature constantly destroys itself, that animals actually eat each other in order to survive. So according to this myth, the punishment of the gods, or that the gods gave to the animals because they were not able to praise them, was to force them to eat each other. So this is actually the myth of how the Mayans explain why actually animals behave in that way. So, well, the gods, of course, continue to think, and they want to continue to, well, to create the humans, these humans that they need in order to survive. So they have a first attempt. Please go to slide 10. Again, there comes an experiment with the human work. The human design by the maker, modeler, bearer. It must simply be tried again. The time for the planting and dawning is nearing. For this, we must make a provider and nurturer. How else can we be invoked and remembered on the face of the earth? So now let's try to make a giver of praise, giver of respect, provider, nurturer, they said. So then comes the building and working with earth and mud. They made a body, but it didn't look good to them. It was just separating, just crumbling, just loosening, just softening, just disintegrating, and just dissolving. It talked at first, but senselessly. It was quickly dissolving in the water. So the god said, let it just dwindle. Let it merely be a thought. So this is fascinating because the first time that they attempt to create humans, I mean, they tried with the animals, so let's say that that was really their first attempt, but now they try to do something kind of resembling a human. They use some kind of material that was really available for them. And we are talking about here, of course, earth and water, so mud. And of course, it fails. The material is not hard enough. And these kind of humans just kind of melt. Well, not literally, because of course they're not melting, but they're dwindling, as they said. And they even try to speak at certain point, but of course these are not sustainable. So these humans will not do. I find interesting, though, that actually we know the story of one very large religious tradition that actually declares that humans were created from mud. Christianity, I'm talking about specifically. So I find it very interesting that for the Mayans, yeah, that kind of humans, they will not do. So what happens? Let's go to slide 11. So what happens is that, again, the gods have to meet and they have to decide what to do. They are worried now because it's taken, well, 2 attempts already. We have to keep going on. So the Popol Vuh, of course, expresses this very well. We will just tell Ishpia Kok, Ishmukane, Hunachpu Possum, Hunachpu Coyote, to try a counting of days, a counting of lots. The mason and sculptor said to themselves. Then they invoke Ishpia Kok, Ishmukane. So, of course, what is fascinating here is that they are including some, by the way, Ish is the prefix for female. So some of these gods are clearly female and they are part of the council. So what is interesting is when they say the mason and sculpture, which of course that means one, said to themselves. So we can see the continuous idea of the multiplicity into one, right? They are one and several at the same time. For those of you that are Christian, that's not that hard to understand when you think about God as one and three at the same time, right? So this is something very, very similar. Again, it's hard to make comparisons because there are different traditions. I'm not saying that one is like the other at all, but you can recognize these concepts a little bit easier. So what then? Well, let's go to slide 12 and then you will see what happens after this council, this meeting. So be it, they replied. The moment they spoke, it was done. The mannequins, wood carvings, human in looks and human in speech. This was the peopling of the face of the earth. They came into being, they multiplied, they had daughters, they had sons, these mannequins, wood carvings. But there was nothing in their hearts and nothing in their minds, no memory of their mason and builder. And so they failed, just an experiment and just a cutout for humankind. They were talking at first, but their faces were dry. So we can see that, well, this is the third time already, right? That they tried, the gods, first with animals and twice with humans. So wood, why wood? Well, again, like earth is and like mud is a very easy material to find. You can find it anywhere, right? And as we know, most societies have actually used wood in order to carve, and to carve wood in the shape of humans is easy. You can make them look like us, really. But of course, this is wood. It's hard, it's dry, and sometimes hollow. So that emptiness actually is reflected here. The Popol Vuh says, or the gods say, that actually they had no feelings, they had no heart, they had no brains. So they were able to speak and everything, but so what? They were not really able to say more than that. So they were not able to praise the gods. And that's what the gods are looking for, right? To be praised. So they're going to punish the wood carvings. So the Popol Vuh says, again, there comes a humiliation, destruction, and demolition. The mannequins, wood carvings, were killed when the heart of the sky devised a flood for them. There came the one named gouger of faces, which of course in this case is a vulture. He gouged out their eyeballs. There came sudden bloodletter, which is a bat. He snapped off their heads. There came crunching jaguar. He ate their flesh. There came tearing jaguar. he tore them open. So a very brutal description, but again, the idea is to have humans that will praise the gods, and well, they haven't been able to find that kind of human yet. So they decided to destroy it. So, what are we talking about? The book that actually we are that I'm using, I'm reading, is actually a very modern translation. Well, actually, I should have to check because I was going to say that it was a translation from Spanish into English, but it may have been that actually Dennis Tedlock, that's the version I'm using here, may have translated directly from Maya Quiche into English. But in any case, the original book that Dennis Tedlock is using is actually, you can see it in that slide, in slide number 13. That slide is actually showing the first page of the Popol Vuh that we still have available. The Popol Vuh that we have right now available was written by Father Jimenez in the very early 1700s. Father Jimenez was a Spanish priest that was assigned to a church in Chichicastenango in the highlands of Guatemala. And there, as many priests at that time, well, he showed some interest on the humanities in general, and he wanted to write a history of that region. So he was looking for some of the old books of the library at his new church, and he found this very old book written with Latin letters, so our alphabet, but in Maya Quiche. Quiche being one of the many Mayan languages. This is the one that is the most common in the highlands of Guatemala. So if you check actually the slide 13, you're going to see that the book is actually divided in two columns. Take a closer look. The one on the left, that's Maya Quiche. The one on the right, that is Spanish. So this is the version of Father Jimenez, whereas he is copying what he is seeing in the older book and then writing a Spanish version next to it. But of course, the book that he saw was the book I was mentioning before. The one written possibly in the 1540s, 1550s, was written totally in Mayan. So it was not in Spanish, but using Latin letters. So that's how actually we get the current Popol Vuh. This 1700s Popol Vuh is right now in the Newberry Library in Chicago. It was sent from Guatemala to Europe. It stayed there for a couple of centuries, and then finally it arrived into Chicago as a donation some decades ago. But of course, what is interesting here is that, well, we have this Popol Vuh from the 1700s. We don't have anymore the original from the 1500s. But of course, that's not the real original. The real original, if you follow actually what the author from the 1500s was describing, was, please go to slide 14, an old Mayan codex. Because he's talking about the ancient writing. When he says ancient writing, he's referring to a book very similar to what you see there. The picture on the bottom, that's actually one page of the Dresden Codex. And the Dresden Codex is one of the very few Mayan books that we still have with us. Most of them were destroyed. A large group of them was destroyed by the Spaniards, who burned these books and destroyed them. Others actually were saved, but they were kept possibly by a priest or somebody else. And the problem is that these books actually, they were made of deer hides and bark. So that means that, taking into account how humid that area of the world is, these books were destroyed by the environment very, very soon. On the top, you can see actually how the Mayan books were divided. Usually, they were painted continuously and then folded into some kind of accordion style. So every time that you open a page, you have to close it in order to go to the next one, exactly as in the case of an accordion. Or you can extend the whole thing if you want. So we only have a very few Mayan books still around. The Dresden Codex is one. But I wanted to show you actually how possibly the book that this guy from the 1500s was talking about when he's mentioning the original Popol Vuh. If you take a closer look to the picture below in the Mayan Codex, the Dresden Codex, you can see certain symbols. Of course, there are some drawings of people, but if you take a look, you can see a lot of dots and bars. Those are numbers. So I want to introduce you a little bit into Mayan mathematics. Don't worry, not too much, but I just wanted you to see those symbols. You're going to find out it's very simple to follow them. One dot is number one. In one bar means 5. So for example, if you see 2 bars and 3 dots on top, that's a number 13, right? 1 bar 5, 2 bars 10, and each dot is a 1, that's 13. If you see, for example, 1 dot by itself, that's a number 1. If you see 2 bars and 2 dots, that's a number 12. Let me see very fast if I find another number that's different. Yeah, 1 bar and 1 dot, that's 6. 4 dots together, that's a 4, etc., etc. But if you take a look, you're going to find that none of those numbers is actually higher than 19. 19 is the highest one. The reason for that is that the Mayan people actually had a very complex system of mathematics, but it was also base 20, not base 10 like ours. So they were working in positions, as we do as well with the 10 system, but actually they were the only people in the Americas and actually the first in the world. And only there was another attempt, successful attempt in India of creating the number 0. So let me rephrase that. The number 0, this very important concept for mathematics, has been invented only twice in history. First time by the Mayan people, and several centuries later by people in India. So actually the modern mathematical system is based on the Indian version because, of course, the 0 coming from the Mayan arrived to the European world much, much later. So, but you can see also a lot of other symbols. Those symbols actually were thought to be just that, ritualistic symbols, oh, very nice ornaments, and that's it. Now we know that actually those are words, because yes, not only the Mayan people actually invented the 0, but actually they are the only people in the Americas that invented a full writing system. So those little symbols that you see there, those are not just nonsensical symbols. These are actually current syllables and letters. Right now, thanks to the breakout of the Mayan code, we can read with confidence more than 90% of all these symbols. So an expert actually can see those symbols and read exactly what is saying there. We know that the Dresden Codex is actually full of information about astronomy, especially the movement of Venus. So that's possibly why you see so many numbers, right? Describing the cycles and the movements of Venus. So my point with this, again, is that take into account, for example, that the Europeans never ever developed a full writing system. That actually the Europeans copied this from the Phoenicians and from other groups. So that means that actually very few times in history a society created a fully writing system from scratch. Well, the Mayan people did that as well. So we can see already that this is a very, very complex and interesting society. Let's go to slide number 15, because of course we're going to part 2 of the story. Part 2 is actually a micro story, and it has to do with the, slide 16, story of Vukub-Kakish. Vukub-Kakish means literally 7 macaw. Vukub means 7, Kakish means macaw. And well, you can see the picture of a very nice macaw. And this works also in a different way, because as you can see, this macaw is very majestic. It's kind of claiming a central position. And you can see in this painting that actually has the sun behind it. The reason for that is that suddenly, when part 2 starts in the Popol Vuh, we see actually Vukub-Kakish claiming that he is the god of the sun. And that, of course, that means that time is starting and that people have to revere him. This is a little bit confusing because we have this other set of gods, right? Talking about the creation and how they're going to do it and all that. And then suddenly we have Vukub-Kakish coming from nowhere, another deity, of course, claiming to be God and to be the god of the sun, which has not been created. The story actually has to do with a planet or a star that is very important for Mayan people. Slide 17. Venus. The star that the Mayan people are talking, or the planet Venus, actually can be seen very easily most of the time just before dawn. That means just before the sun comes out. In the picture, you can see that actually, well, in the top, you can kind of see the moon still, but kind of in the center of the picture, a little bit to the right, you can see actually a very bright star. The brightest star at about 4:30 a.m. in the morning, that's Venus. So basically, this is a story that is saying that people, before the sun comes out, believe that actually Venus was the sun. And of course, with the appearance of the sun, the days will start. So this was, Vukub-Kakish was a very vain god, if you want, and he was a trickster as well. So what he was doing was actually just claiming to be something that he was not. And therefore, the other gods had to punish him. So what do? Well, they sent a couple of very important heroes. Slide 18. Hunahpu and Ishbalanque. Hunahpu and Ishbalanque are actually hero twins. And this is important because since you are already in Flagstaff and in northern Arizona, you may actually, some of you may actually know that there are other traditions, not only the Mayan people, that actually have stories of hero twins. The Diné people, or the Navajo as you call them, actually also have a story of hero twins, but they are of course not the only ones. So Hunahpu and Ishbalanque are actually sent by the gods to actually defeat Vukub-Kakish. And Hunahpu and Ishbalanque, well, Ishbalanque means the feminine jaguar. Balam means jaguar. But let's focus on the other guy, Hunahpu. The name Hunahpu means one hunter. And hunters in the Mayan world actually used blowguns. So let's go to slide 19. What happens is that, of course, Vukub-Kakish is a macaw. He is on the trees, and it's very hard to catch. So what happens is that actually Hunahpu is able to defeat him by actually shooting from a blowgun from the earth. Vukub-Kakish falls, and that is his defeat. Now the gods can go back to actually creating the world and creating humanity. This is the end of part 2. And it makes it a little bit complex to understand because what happens is that, honestly, in my opinion, this story should go at the end of part 3. Why is that? Well, these guys, Hunahpu and Ishbalanque, they are third generation gods. So let me explain. We have the main gods, the council that has been working on creating the world. They are going to have kids, and these kids actually are going to be named Hunahpu and Vukub-Hunahpu. And actually Hunahpu has 2 kids, which are going to be the third generation, which are the guys that we just mentioned, the ones in slide 18, Hunahpu and Ishbalanque. So this is kind of weird because, wait, we haven't talked about the second generation people yet. And the worst thing is that in part 3, we're going to talk a little bit about them. So you will see where this story, in my opinion, should be. But of course, I'm trying to respect the order that it comes in the book. So, slide 20, part 3. Slide 21. So, as I was talking about, the earth was already separated from the water, and the gods were still thinking about what to do with the thing about humans. But they also wanted to start time, day and night, and therefore the sense of time for these humans to live in. So Hunahpu and Vukub-Hunahpu are the sons of the gods. And they actually start to play a game on Earth that actually is going to be very important. We have been talking about a concept, when I say we, I mean we scholars, the concept of Mesoamerica, which actually is basically a concept that unites a lot of different people from a kind of a large area. We started saying that all the people that lived before the Spaniards arrived between Honduras and the Central Valley of Mexico, that you can kind of put them together. That we know they are very different because we're talking about the Aztecs, the Toltecs, the Zapotecs, the Olmecs, the Maya. And of course, they are not the same people. They are all different. So they are all different people, but they have a lot of things in common. I mean, language is different. A lot of traditions are different, but they have a lot of things in common. It's like they borrow things from each other. And it makes sense. I mean, they are kind of close in space. So they shared some information, some ideas. There was actually one game, the ball game, that was actually created possibly by the Olmecs, and that the Mayan people actually used in very important ceremonies. The ball game actually was a very interesting development because the ball that you see there in this picture is actually made of rubber. So the Mayan people actually had natural rubber and they were able to create these bouncing balls. And you had to hit it from one place to the other and keep it bouncing. That was the idea of the game. The game actually has a lot of ritual value and it has been everywhere in each city that you can find between the Central Valley of Mexico, that means the Aztecs, all the way down to Honduras, that means the Mayan, they have ball games. Sometimes, depending on the size of the city, they have 3, 5, 10 ball game stadiums. Well, it happens that this is a very important symbol of Mesoamerica. And as we continue to do some research, well, we find more and more ball games, not only in those territories of the traditional version of Mesoamerica, but even further away. We have found ball games all the way south to Panama, and actually recently, all the way north as Arizona and New Mexico. For example, Casa Grande, which is actually close to Tucson, between Tucson and Phoenix, you can find actually in those ruins a ball game. You can find them also in the Canyon of Che in New Mexico. And actually, I will not be surprised if there are other areas of those two states, or even in California, Utah, or close, that there are also some other ball games. So this concept of Mesoamerica actually has expanded way more than that we acknowledge it so far. So anyway, let's go back to the story. Hunhunahpu and Vukubhunahpu are playing ball game. And what happens is that, of course, well, everything is kind of quiet, right? So they are playing and this ball is bouncing. And you have to imagine that actually these guys are playing a second floor and that there is somebody living the first floor that is not very happy with all the noise. Who is not happy? Let's go to slide 22. The Lords of Xibalba. Xibalba is the underworld, and these are the death gods of the underworld. So, of course, it's important to understand that this is not exactly like hell. The underworld doesn't have the same meaning for the Mayan people as it has for other people. And for Christians, the underworld means hell. It's a place of punishment. In the case of the Mayan, not necessarily. It's a dark place, and it's a place you don't want to be necessarily. But the reason for that is that, of course, what they're thinking is, well, what happens with the body of those that die? We bury them. And then, of course, they decompose, they bleed, they actually look very awful. Well, actually, I found a modern representation of these gods. So if you go to slide 23, I found this on internet. It's a work by Milton Sobrero. And he actually made these very modern versions of the Mayan gods of the underworld. So you can see Hun Kame and Vukub Kame, so 1 dead and 7 dead. But you can see other representations, all of them connected to disease, to pain, to decomposition, and all that stuff. Well, anyway, the Lords of Xibalba actually get really mad. So they call Hun Hunahpu and Vukub Hunahpu. By the way, you may have realized already by now that Hun means 1 and Vukub means 7. So, of course, like the Jewish people, the Mayan people also believe in numerology and that numbers have meanings, So in any case, they call them. You would think, well, they just want to scold them or to threaten them, don't do this again, just go play somewhere else. Actually, no. These guys, the Lords of Xibalba, are not playing. So actually what they did was to kill them. They killed both Hun Hunahpu and Vukub Hunahpu, and they decapitated them, and they buried their heads. What happens is that with time, these heads actually started to grow into trees, and they became, slide 24, gourd trees. These gourds, though, started to take a different shape. They were not totally round, and actually they started to take the shape of faces. And there was one girl, the daughter of one of the Lords of Xibalba, that saw this tree and became very curious. She approached this tree and she found out that actually one of the heads was talking to her. This was the head of Hun Hunahpu. So Hunahpu was able to tell to Ishkik, look, we had a plan for continuing to create the world and create humanity. And now we need your help. And what should I do? Well, I need to actually have two kids, another hero set of hero twins, and I need somebody to actually be the mother of those kids. So Ishkik agrees. So as you can see in the picture, the head of Hunhunahpu spits in the hand of Ishkik. She gets pregnant, and therefore she has to abandon the lords of Xibalba, and she goes to live with the old gods. And then, yes, she gets pregnant and she has two kids. So slide 25. Those are Hunahpu and Ishbalanque. Yes, the same guys that we talked about before, the ones that actually defeated Vukubka Kish. So you see that, okay, now we are talking about these guys again. Why is that story all the way back there? Well, you will see soon. So what happens with Hunahpu and Ishbalanque? Well, the old gods actually asked them to not go down to earth and play ball, because actually that's how their father and uncle got killed. But of course, these are young kids, so they don't listen to the good counsel of old people. So Hunahpu and Ishbalanque decided to go down. They actually took a couple of rubber balls and started to play with them. So guess what happened? Slide 26. Well, again, the lords of Xibalba were really, really mad, and they called them down. So, slide 27. What happens is that the lords of Xibalba try to play a game with Hunahpu and Ishbalanque, and they told them that if they defeated them, that they will kill them. So Hunahpu and Ishbalanque actually played ball with them, but none of them was defeated. So the lords of Xibalba asked them to stay in a room prepared for them for that night. This is going to happen for 6 nights in a row. And the lords of Xibalba actually are going to give some special houses or rooms to the twin heroes, Hunahpu and Ishbalanque. So they're going to stay in 6 different rooms, each in a different night. The idea of the lords of Xibalba is that, well, we are not being able to defeat them in the ball game, so we cannot kill them. So instead, we're going to actually put them in these houses that actually they get killed there. The first house is the Bat House, or the Sotsna. Razor House, or Chamna, is the second one. Dark House, or Ak-Ap-Na, is the third one. Jaguar House, Balam-Na. Fire House, K-Ak-Na. And Cold House, Sis-Na. Here, actually, you may have already learned a little bit of Mayan. You may have realized already that the word Na means house. And not only that, you can actually even look for the symbol that represents house. So if you go to Bat House, you're going to see that actually the glyph for bat is, well, the head of a bat. And next to it, you can see some kind of like an ear-shaped thing. That's actually the word Na. Also in Jaguar House is easy. You can see the head of the jaguar, that means jaguar, and then the word Na. In Firehouse, you can see the smoke of the fire on top, and the same symbol in a different position. That's again Na, meaning house. So there you go, your first Mayan word. Slide 28. So these are the 6 houses of Xibalba. As typical of many myths in different religions, gods have to go, or heroes actually have to go through a set of trials before proving themselves. So, slide 29. So the first trial is the Dark House. What the lords of Xibalba asked them, to Hunahpu and Ishbalanque, is to actually pass the next test. They give them a couple of cigars, and they actually tell them that they have to start the cigar, start to burn it, and that actually they expect the cigar to be in perfect shape the next day. So, of course, what happens is that Hunahpu and Ishbalanque, they have a very good connection with animals. They can speak to animals. So actually they ask a couple of light bugs to help them. So the light bugs actually stand on the front of the cigar, and they kind of go up and down. They go on and off, and that looks like they are smoking when they are not, of course. So the lords of Xibalba are happy because they're okay, ready, they're done, because they're going to die, because there's no way they can give us a perfectly shaped cigar tomorrow. But of course, since this is not fire but just a couple of light bugs, in the morning, um, Hunahpu and Ishbalanque are able to deliver the cigars in perfect shape. So they're safe. Slide 30. House number 2, the Razor House. Razor, of course, can be translated also as obsidian. Obsidian actually was a very fine blade made of this volcanic rock. It's kind of a crystal, if you want. And obsidian actually is very, very sharp. I was reading recently about a couple of surgeons, eye surgeons, that actually prefer to use obsidian cuts instead of laser because it's sharper for their surgery. So just to give you an idea of how dangerous razor made of obsidian can be. So what happens is that actually these obsidians are just flying in this room. But, these guys actually, again, they have close friends that are animals. And a couple of dogs approach them and tell them to crawl like they do so they can actually evade the blades. And they do so. So, the third night, they're sent to, slide 31, the cold house. So what happens is that possibly the lords of Xibalba dropped Hunahpu and Ishbalanque in the middle of midnight in Flagstaff during December. So what I'm trying to say is that, of course, this was a very, very cold place. So what happens is that actually these guys were tricky as well. They actually carried some logs and some stones to start a fire with them. And when they got inside the house, they were able to start a fire, and that's how they survived. Slide 32 shows Jaguar House. So of course, a lot of jaguars, very, very hungry. That's where they live. They throw Hunahpu and Ishbalanque there. But Hunahpu and Ishbalanque actually were carrying some bones with them. And they took the bones and threw them at the jaguars. So the jaguars got entertained and didn't kill them. Slide 33, the firehouse. And this one actually they don't explain much. They just basically say that actually Hunahpu and Ishbalanque got into the firehouse. Of course, there was fire. It was really, really hot. But for some reason, they never got burned. The Popol Vuh doesn't explain why. And the sixth house is the bat house, slide 34. So what happens, and this is a house full of bats, and Hunahpu and Ishbalanque, in order to avoid the bats, they go very, very small. And remember that Hunahpu means hunter, one hunter. So of course he had a blowing gun. So what happens is that actually the two of them became very, very small and got inside the blowguns, and that's how they actually saved their lives from the bats. So to make the story short, in slide 35, you're going to see that finally, after 6 nights, the lords of Xibalba and Hunahpu and Ishbalanque play another game, and this time Hunahpu and Ishbalanque defeat them. Slide 36, that is actually finally how the lords of Xibalba are destroyed. This is very important because now, according to the story, Hunahpu and Ishbalanque can go out of Xibalba, and they climb and they actually reach the earth, but actually they keep climbing, and finally they become the sun and the moon. And here is with a story I was telling you before should be. So slide 37. Before they go up and become the sun and the moon, it is logical for me that there should be somebody challenging them and calling himself to be the sun. And that's where Hunahpu actually finally kills Vukubka Kish, who was claiming fakely to be the sun. And finally, in slide 38, that's when Hunahpu and Ishbalanque become the sun and the moon. Therefore, they start to move time, and therefore Earth is finally created. So as you can see, I wanted to talk about a little bit about how the story is not really straightforward. In my opinion, Vukubka Kish, the story of Vukubka Kish should be a little bit later, and that it fits perfectly in the moment that I actually was mentioning, which makes me think again that this guy that was writing down was writing from memory, and actually he had to go back and forth and wanted to write something just before he forgot, and then keep going on with the story. Why? Well, because part 4 takes us back to the old gods. So let's go to slide 40. All these old gods and goddesses met again and decided to figure out, well, wait a second, yeah, all these things have happened with Hunahpunish Baranque, but we have to finish the creation of humankind. So, what do we do? So they think and they think, or as the book says, they worry it. And finally, in slide 41, they actually decide to call the grandmother goddess, Ishmukane. And Ishmukane, as all grandmothers, is very wise. And of course, she basically told the gods, come on, guys, this is not that hard. What is the most important staple for the Mayan people? What are they going to eat? Well, let's make them of that. Slide 42. Corn. 43. And that's what happened. Ishmukane basically told the gods, just make them from corn. So take some corn apart, make it into a dough, and then you can make humans from corn. That's actually the material of their body. So of course, it's a flexible material, but it doesn't dwindle like mud. So that's a perfect material for creating humans. And 44, those are actually the Mayan people. That's why they call themselves sometimes the people of corn. So now we have finally humanity created. So we stop starting a little bit about the gods because now we have humans around, right? So here the Popol Vuh changes a little bit. It stops the creation because the creation is done. So Earth is done. The sun and the moon are done. So the Earth is moving. Finally, there are days and nights. And finally, we have humans, right? So that was the purpose. On slide 45, you can see that actually, according to the Popol Vuh, the gods created 4 original couples. Kahapaluna married Balam Kitse. Chomiha married Balam Akap. Kakishaha married Ikibalam. And Sunuhina married Mahukuta. This last couple is going to be the couple that are going to be the first fathers or parents of the Quiche people. So here's where we enter into this part of what I call myth history, which is part of the presentation. What I'm trying to say is that the problem with the Popol Vuh is the same problem as many of these very ancient traditions. When they are very, very old, it's very hard to separate myth from facts. And that's when myth and history become mixed and you cannot tell exactly which one, when one ends and when the other one starts. The idea that these 4 original couples existed and that one of them was the first couple of the Quiche people, maybe these are real names. Maybe these are just totally made up. Maybe there were never 4 couples. So that's a problem sometimes. But in any case, what is interesting is that if you go to slide 46, the story of the Popol Vuh starts to tell us something very interesting. That these couples were living in actually a place called the 7 Caves, Vukup Pek. Well, the problem with this story is that it's exactly the same that the Aztec people and the Nahua speaking people had, or have, because they're still around, of a place called Chicomostoc, which also means the 7 Caves, as the first place where they actually were created in. This is important because it tells us that possibly this idea of the Popol Vuh of the Quiche people is representing not really a Mayan story, but a Nahua story. The Nahuas, by the way, the most famous of them are the Aztecs, but they speak Nahuatl, which is one of the versions of Nahua. But Nahua actually belongs to a very larger language family called Uto-Aztec. And the Uto-Aztec actually includes people like the Aztecs, but also the Toltecs and some other people in Mexico, but also even some people in the United States. The Pima or Tohono O'odham, for example, speak some kind of Nahua. The Hopi in Arizona also speak some kind of Nahua. And other members of the Uto-Aztec families are actually the Shoshone. So all these people have something in common. It looks like the original place for Chicomostoc was either northwestern Mexico or southwest United States, somewhere in that area. So that's where we know that the Aztecs come from. The myth of Aztlan actually It talks of a place where they come from that actually, when they describe it, it sounds very much like the Sonoran Desert. Well, the problem with this again is that this is not the original Mayan story, but actually the Quiche are taking it, which tells us that the book that actually the author of the 1500s have been reading is actually a book written after the collapse of the Mayan people in the 900s. So when the Mayan people recovered, just starting in the thousands, especially during the 1200s, they were building new cities like Chichen Itza in places like that. So the Mayan civilization came back. Um, this was a different Maya civilization. You already had a lot of contact with a lot of people from the Central Valley of Mexico, and therefore this is a period of pan-Mesoamericanism, a period in which the Mayan people and the Nahua speakers and some other groups were actually exchanging a lot of information and ideas, so much they started to look a little bit like each other. So it wouldn't be strange that they adopted this story of the Chico Mostok, the seven caves, the Kupek, even when it didn't belong really to them, just because it sounded appropriate. In any case, these couples leave Vukupek and they arrive to Tolan. Tolan is actually a story that is also repeated in other cultures in the region, and it's basically a capital city, a famous city where they arrived and where all these people live together. We know that the city of Teotihuacan, which was built in the Valley of Mexico about 2,000 years ago and abandoned about 1,500 years ago, actually had several neighborhoods. One for Mayan people, one for Zapotec people, and so on. So it may be that this is the Tolan that they are talking about, a city, a very cosmopolitan city where different people actually met. But it may be just a generic term for a large city that existed at a certain point that was very, very important for all these groups. In any case, what happens is that the Quiche actually have to migrate. They leave Tolan, and before they leave Tolan, let's go to slide 47, they actually are given two gods that they have to pray to, Hakavitz and Tohil. These two are the gods that the Quiche are going to take as their patron gods. And with them, they take also a baton or a scepter, giving the Quiche the rule of a new region they're going to inhabit. Slide 48. So, from Tolan, they start to move south. What is interesting is that they mention that they left behind some very dear people that they never saw again. They left behind the Yaquis, which, of course, we're not talking about the Yaquis, the indigenous people that live actually in southern Arizona and northern Mexico, but actually this is a term, a generic term for all the Nahua speakers. So the Aztecs, the Toltecs, and all those other groups are the Yaquis that the Mayan Quiche are talking about. They also left behind another group, that Tepeo Oliman, which actually we think they are referring to the Olmecs, which is a group that lives or lived mostly in the Gulf of Mexico coast. And finally, they arrived to the highlands of Guatemala. And there, the Popol Vuh start to describe all the different genealogies of kings all the way up to the arrival of the Spaniards. So what happens is that this Popol Vuh not only tells the creation of the world, it talks about the creation of humankind and the first humans, the first Quiche, but actually establish a genealogy. So of course, the first couple of Quiche people had a son, which is named there, who had a son, and so on, all the way up to the 1500s. The last two Quiche kings that are mentioned, their names are actually in Spanish. The reason for that is that they're already converted to Christianity. So that's how the Popol Vuh ends. In slide 49, you can see a map that may help you to understand a little bit this process of migrations. The problem with all those arrows is that you can see that most of them refer to BCE. BCE means before our era, and our era started 2018 years ago. So most of those migrations actually happened 3,000, 4,000 years ago. But instead, if you check the Quichean migration, the Maya Quiche migration, is supposed to be very recent, about 1200 of our era. And that's really problematic because actually we know, archaeologists have done a lot of research, that in that area of the highlands of Guatemala, the Quiche people were already there long before 1200. So that means that this Quiche first couple that arrived to the highlands of Guatemala is definitely a myth. The story, possibly, and this is a hypothesis, is that actually this first Quiche couple mentioned was the name of the first new dynasty members. Remember that kings actually are all related in the same family, but sometimes that house or that family collapses, they die, and a new family takes power, either by force or by default. And there's a chance that these Quiche people that are named after the year 1200 were just a new dynasty. So that's where myth and history mixes. We don't know if these are real people from 2000 years ago. They may be actually people from actually only 800 years ago, but they may actually never existed in just a story. So it's hard to figure out. Any case, the Popol Vuh, slide 50, is a council book. It's kind of like a book of the whole society, of the whole community, where they actually keep a lot of records. But of course, it's not the only book. It's not the only book that we have from the Mayan people. The book is really important because it talks about certain deities that are very relevant. Quetzalcoatl, you may have heard about that figure, is the feathered serpent that actually the Popol Vuh talks about. Is named sometimes Kukulkan or Gukumats. The three words mean exactly the same. Kuk and Quetzal and Guk mean bird. And the other words, Coatl, Kulkan, Kumats, mean all serpent. So it's the feathered serpent. And this is a very important deity for most of the region. They also talk about Itzamna and Ishel, which again helps us to understand a little bit how they thought about their gods. Itzamna is this very generic, broad, abstract entity, the first entity. And that means that all the forces, all the energies derive from Itzamna, and therefore they are mostly the expressions of Itzamna. They are not different gods, they are Itzamna itself. But at the same time, because according to Mayan tradition, everything that is one is also two, that means that they believe in the duality of gods and energies, Itzamna is also Ishel, which if you already saw the prefix IX, that means that it's a feminine god, a goddess. Therefore, Itzamna and Ishel are the grandmother and the grandfather, and they both are the same at the same time. This is important because the duality in Mayan understanding, it's very relevant. What happens is that according to the Mayan people, we all have the two expressions of one single force inside us. That each of us as humans are both male and female. That actually some of us are more male and some of us are more female. And that actually, not only that, but actually we have to find a way of how to deal with both our male and female parts. That happens also in other areas. For example, for the Mayan people, a day and night are the same expression of time, or are two different expressions of time, but they are part of time. But they are not fighting against each other. Day has to exist in order for night to exist, and night has to exist in order for day to exist. So they are complementary. So I don't want to compare again because it's difficult to say that because they are not the same ideas, but the concept of the yin and yang that you can see in some Asian cultures may be similar to this. The Popol Vuh is not the only book that we have around, I was saying. If you go to slide 53 and from there on, we can see that there are other books that tell stories very similar to the one in the Popol Vuh, but of course they add their own twist to the stories. The book of Chilam Balam of Chumayel, that's in the region of Yucatan, is possibly one of the most famous ones. But we have also the Chilam Balam of Ixil. We have the memorial of the Cachiqueles, which is another group in Guatemala. They emphasize a little bit more the process of the conquest, but actually they share a lot of things with the Popol Vuh. The Mayan people also wrote not only history and mythology, but also they had other artistic expressions. In slide 55, you can find the Rabinal Achi, which is actually a play, with actors and sometimes with songs and with dances. And this is actually an artistic development that existed before the Spaniards arrived. One of the early, the first priests to arrive to the Americas actually decided to write this down, and that's why we have the Rabinal Achi still around. And of course, these are books that were copied during the 1500s from traditions of the Mayan people from before that. But if you remember the Mayan codex that I mentioned before, actually there are some of them still around. In slide 57 and on, you can find the Dresden Codex that is located right now in the Library of Dresden in Germany. 58 actually shows the codex that you can find at the Museum of the Americas in Madrid. In 59, you can find the codex that is located in the Library of Paris. And finally, the Grolier Codex, which is the last one to be found. This was found by accident in the 1960s, and there were a lot of doubts about it being a real document. There have been a lot of fakes around because you can sell this at a very expensive price. But of course, they had doubts about it. Finally, because all the symbols and the ideas and the materials, etc., they realized actually no, this is a real book, and possibly written in the 1200s or so. It was actually here in the United States and Harvard and Penn State for a long time, and finally it went back to Mexico City just a few months ago, where it stays right now in the National Museum of Anthropology and History. But of course, we have other kind of writing. And this is very important to understand because we lost a lot of the Mayan people, but we are recovering more and more. Slide 61 shows the city of Tikal, possibly one of the most famous Mayan cities. And there, in 62, you can see actually a stela. A stela is actually a very large piece of rock, a column, that actually has a lot of inscriptions. And although these inscriptions, like in 63, you can see it closer, actually tells us a lot of stories. These are, again, words, syllables, and letters, and they are telling us the story of people, when they were born, when they died, who they married, the story of wars between cities, etc., etc. And of course, as you can see in slide 64, a lot of these stories also have to do with the Popol Vuh. I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation. Goodbye.